Hello and welcome to Miniature Adventures. I'm Big Lee, and this week I want to talk about clarity versus inspiration, the pursuit of precision in Wargames rules. So the best Wargames rules try to have a clarity of language that is clear, concise and easy to understand. But rulebooks, of course, have become more than just a set of instructions. They're a source of inspiration as well. Whether that comes from the inclusion of historical extracts or glossy colour photos or reproduced documents, they are included to excite the gamer and inspire the painter. Getting that balance right between clarity and inspiration is incredibly difficult, and I have no doubt that we've all encountered rules that don't quite hit the mark at one time or another. But even good sets of rules can sometimes have problems with interpretation, shall we say, leading to disagreements and even heated arguments across the games table. All of which, of course, has the potential to ruin an otherwise enjoyable gaming experience. This is why the group I belong to, Postage Rejects, like playing games that are umpired by a third party. The umpire gets to make the judgment call and take the flak if necessary, and keeps the game moving where it might otherwise grind to a halt in a bitter argument. Now, I doubt if any games designer starts writing a set of rules with the intention of being vague or contradictory. That's why the best rules will have been vigorously edited, revised and playtested before being published. Only through playing the game can the contradictions, confusion and vagaries of a set of rules be identified and hopefully eliminated. Where this hasn't been done properly, there will probably be errata, quickly followed by new additions and even complete rewrites. And as a friend of mine, Riley, observed, any set of rules on its 5th or 6th edition either wasn't playtested properly in the first place, or the publisher needs to drive up book sales to keep the money rolling in. But even with a well-written set of rules, the old adage holds true: no set of rules survives first contact with wargamers. Play any set of rules thoroughly enough and wargamers will find out how to break them. Now, while writing this script, I actually came across the perfect example of a seemingly simple rule that on second reading could do with a little more clarity. So I was scanning through the Wars of the Roses rule set that I've got, Test of Resolve, and I had to do a double take because I reread the section on movement, which I've read many times before, and suddenly thought to myself, that could be interpreted one of two ways. Essentially, the rule says that players can roll for movement for all of the companies in a battle, the medieval equivalent of a battalion or a division. But the way it is worded, it sounds as if you could either roll for all the individual companies or roll for all the companies as a single roll for that battalion. Now, I prefer the latter interpretation, not least because it will speed up play. But it's not 100% crystal clear, and I think this interpretation, my interpretation, the version that I'm going to go with, makes more sense historically, and that's how I'm going to play it. But I'm not 100% certain that I'm actually correct. A single extra sentence would clarify the author's intention, but that will have to wait for another edition, or maybe a question to the Test of Resolve Facebook group. One thing that I think can make a set of rules a bit opaque is the inclusion of too many sidebars and too much historical context. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it is important to include some of that so that the reader knows why the author made a particular choice for the rules, for instance. It can be interesting to understand the thought processes of the rules designer that led them to a particular mechanism for achieving a particular outcome. But I often find that when this technique is overused with embedded sidebars and context boxes on nearly every page, it can actually become a bit of a distraction and a source of confusion in its own right. Every additional unnecessary word included in the text has the potential to make rules bloated and contradictory, and opens up a whole new cans of worms. In an attempt to provide clarity, the author can unintentionally create endless debate or disagreement amongst players. So while historical flavour can make rulebooks more interesting to read, it can also hinder the essential purpose of the rules to provide clear and unambiguous instructions. In my humble opinion, it's a technique that has to be used sparingly and with great care, lest it create more problems than it solves. Rick Priestley and John Lamshed put it well in their book Tabletop Wargames, A Designer's and Writer's Handbook, when they discuss the rules for chess. This board game has to have extremely tight rules that are clear and unequivocal, but it's very doubtful if many people would call the rules of chess a riveting read. The problem is that tight, concise wording can come across as lacking in passion. It can sound more like a legal document than a game, and would actually be quite a boring read probably. Of course, most Wargames rules authors try to balance explanation with precision to make clear rules that are also interesting to read. And in doing so they find they have no choice but to sacrifice a little bit of clarity. All of which takes us back to confusion, misinterpretation and ambiguity. This is why, as I said in the introduction, I like to play games which have an umpire to mediate and interpret the rules. And yes, sometimes to make the wrong decision on our behalf. At least it keeps things moving. So to sum up, the perfect set of rules probably doesn't exist, and trying to write them will almost always fail. But rules that come closest to perfection are those where the author has at least tried to balance clarity of language with explanation and context. Getting the balance right is the hard part, all of which of course neatly leads to my question of the day. So putting aside the judgment of whether a set of rules was fun to play, focusing purely on the question of clarity alone, what were the best rules that you've ever read? Which set worked best at communicating the author's intent to the player, and why? Was the rulebook crystal clear, unambiguous and legalistic in its language, or were they more descriptive and expressive in the choice of words? As always, I'd love to learn from your experiences in the comments section below. So it's been a busy week on multiple fronts. My day job always seems to get busier this time of year, and I've been cracking on with multiple work projects in the hope of squeezing in a few days off between Christmas and New Year. And I have indeed managed to book off a few days, during which I hope to get some painting done, and I'm hoping to have a time for a solo game or two. Meanwhile, on the hobby front this week, I've had a very interesting chat with Henry Hyde on Tuesday as a guest on his Battle Chat podcast. He asked me if I'd like to come on his show earlier this year, and while I said yes, of course, I did wonder why he'd want to interview me of all people. As it was, the conversation flowed very easily, and it was great fun to have a proper conversation with Henry, rather than the usual quick sentence or two that we seem to always snatch as we're rushing around at various shows. We ranged across a lot of subjects, from my early engagement with games like D&D and Warhammer through to historical wargaming with the Rejects, and over a decade of absolutely amazing games in the Shed of War. We even briefly touched on today's talking point about clarity in Wargames rules. Henry has just published his Shot, Steel and Stone rules at the time as a download. It's now out on paperback version, so it's out now. And when we recorded the podcast, it had just become available as a PDF. It'd literally been only available for less than 12 hours, and he was already receiving questions, despite the fact that the rules had been available in his Wargames compendium book, and therefore play tested thoroughly for over a decade. As I said earlier, no set of rules survives first contact with Wargamers, and I couldn't have found a better illustration of that maxim if I'd tried. Henry really is a very convivial host, and although we were talking for well over 2 hours, the time shot past far too quickly. At the end, I gave him an open invitation to Reject HQ and the Shed of War, so we'll have to organise something in the new year. You're probably bored of hearing my voice by now, but I'll put a link to the podcast in the description below if you feel like listening to the whole show. So time for a Workbench update. At the start of the week I did a very last minute stock check of consumables, because the last thing I wanted to do was run out of varnish or glue at a critical moment during the Analog Hobbies Painting Challenge, which has just started. In fact, it started today, the day that I'm doing the recording, which is Thursday. Thankfully I've had plenty of stock for the time being, but I'll definitely have to put in some orders in the new year. With the last preparations completed, I was ready to hit the ground running. The competition officially started at 6:01 this morning on the 21st here in the UK, but I wasn't about to get up that early. I did still manage to get a little bit of paint on my first model before heading out to work, and I'm hoping to get it finished in the next few days. I mean, long gone are the days when I could take a portable painting kit out with me, so I had to wait until I got home to continue, and I'm hoping when I finish recording this that I can actually get a bit more paint on models. You know, already less than 24 hours into the competition, the first amazing contributions have been posted on the challenge blog, and I urge you to go and have a look. As always, really inspiring, some of the stuff that's on there. I always try to get my first entry done relatively quickly, and as has become a tradition for me, it's going to be a Christmas themed miniature. I now have quite a collection of these models from a range of different manufacturers, each associated with a different challenge. So once I've got that initial entry out of the way, I've got a week off work to get working and get cracking on my next few painting models. So I couldn't end this week's miniature adventures without wishing you all a very, very happy Christmas. Hopefully your sacks will be overflowing with hobby related goodies and inspiration for the year to come. Next week, next Sunday, I will be discussing the inevitable tradition of the New Year's resolution, and we'll talk a little bit about how to keep them. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful holiday and get at least some time to indulge your hobby, whether that's a little bit of reading, painting, or even a game or two. Thank you to everyone who supported the channel this year, and especially to all the new subscribers who've come on board. Happy Christmas to everyone. Well, that's it for this week. As always, please join the conversation in the comments below. I really do enjoy reading your thoughts and learning from your insights and experiences. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe and share. And if you want to keep up to date with weekly content from this channel, please tap the bell notification icon. So until next week, stay safe, keep gaming, and of course, keep rolling high.